Who needs more time? All right, let's go ahead and figure out how you'll do in your next career as a GDOT employee.
I won't put my.
And how much of a hard ass you guys are going to be once the roles are reversed. All right, softball to start you off. Anyone disagree that fuel? That's definitely allowable. So we've got a definite one there. How about that next one? Here's a situation where that level of effort to keep up with tracking time to create adequate documentation falls back to the agency. The agency has to make a decision whether the level of effort for her to keep up warrants classification as a direct expense, or should we include her in the indirect cost pool. The overwhelming decision typically made there is that we drop the receptionist in the indirect cost pool. Because we're talking usually at this position of parsing time, not in 15-minute increments, but literally their day can change from one program to the next minute by minute. And so almost everybody makes the executive decision to include this type of personnel in the indirect cost pool. What about the salary of the executive director? Same point, and it just depends on the level of activity that the executive director goes through. If their time can be reeled off in good chunks attributable to one program versus another, then it might be appropriate for that executive director to keep the requisite documentation to bill their expense as a direct charge. Depending on the organization, size, and complexity, it may be more appropriate to include his or her salary as an indirect expense. All right, how about the creation, printing, and distribution of a general agency brochure? Just to toot our own horn that we're out here in the community. Just because as the executive director I have a big ego and I want everybody to know who I am. Yeah, this is the type of thing that is not allowed under the cost guidance of the super circular. All right, number 5, taxes paid on fuel.
That's trick question. We're tax exempt. We don't have taxes.
Oh, so I should have done a little more homework in Georgia before I got here.
Some states don't let you. North Carolina.
Yeah, it's actually, if you read, there is a section in 200.420 to 475 that will say, if the feds say you have to pay this tax, then we'll consider it to be an allowable expense. Like I said, in North Carolina, we had, as a state employee, we decided it was too much trouble to keep up with the subrecipients filing for their reimbursement claims, so we just deducted it right off the top and wouldn't pay it. Bad debt, kind of gave you a softball there since we discussed that one specifically in one of our slides. That's unallowable, might be a great, smart business decision for the organization, but it's just simply not an allowable expense. And what I want to underscore there is don't self-evaluate or be critical of management decisions that yield unallowable expenses. That doesn't make you bad managers. In this case, it could be a smart agency decision. How about retirement?
You're going to skip over your flower thing?
Come on, I gave you that one. I told my Betty Green story too early. Used my Kenny Rogers, the only Kenny Rogers song I know, because I'm not country, I'm rock and roll. So we know flowers, subjective. Retirement, the agency executive director.
As long as he works.
That's a fringe benefit. It is allowable, but with some constraints. We can't buy him his own private island in Jamaica or off Jamaica. It is subject to some restrictions. Lobbying. And what about dry cleaning? Wait a minute, I heard no, I heard a lot of yeses over this side.
And what was the dry cleaning, the whole thing? I didn't see it at the end. Can we pull it up? What was the whole dry cleaning?
These are driver uniforms.
Oh, no.
Not allowable? Yes, allowable.
It depends on what's written.
Do you want to phone a friend? This one is a trick question. Just because I'm sneaky like that, you can go through the super circular until you're 90. You're not going to find an answer in the super circular on this one. That list of selected items of cost from 200.420 to 475 is not all inclusive. At some point, you're going to encounter an expense that's not directly addressed. And this is the situation where I alluded to earlier. If you're unsure, it isn't necessarily easier to get forgiveness than it is permission. Here's a situation where you'd want to ask, because this is not directly noted in either the FTA circulars or the super circular. Generally recognized, however, throughout the transit industry as an eligible expense. In rural transit, we don't always use uniforms, but in urban settings, almost all urban transit systems require their drivers to have a standard uniform, and there is usually some corporate participation in that expense. It is eligible. Because at some point, somebody determined that to be reasonable and necessary to the operation of an urban public transit system. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about allowability. And in your downloaded PowerPoint, following the class quiz, I'll provide you with detailed information on how I arrived at my answers to the quiz. And so you'll see that for each subject item, and I'll give you the particular citation that I used. And there is, let's get the driver uniforms so you can see. No one specifically addresses that.
I have this question.
Yes.
We have a maintenance department that likes to use the word feng shui, but we don't have that in county level budget. What is the rule on beautification, another one of his words, of buildings? That was nowhere found in anything that I could that was an allowable expense, like fern trees for the outside of the transit building and yada, 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 rose bushes.
When we get to the subject of contributions and donations, one of my audience quiz questions is going to be associated with that question. So rather than answer it now, I'm going to hold off and ask you to give me some latitude, and we'll discuss it when we get to contributions and donations.